Shock results shouted the headlines, as politicians were stunned by the rise of far right-wing parties in the EU elections. But the real surprise is, why was anybody surprised? Support for these popularist parties wasn't just likely, it was expected. Yet politicians and the media were as surprised as they were by Brexit and Trump's victory in 2016. How did this happen, they asked. The answer is simple. Ignore what voters want for years, dismiss their concerns, and they will eventually turn to someone else. Sound familiar? It should. In Britain, Rishi Sunak is shocked to see Conservative voters turn into Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Similarly, across Europe, mainstream parties are losing voters by the millions. French President Macron called a sudden election, hoping to show Marine Le Pen's weakness. Germany's leader faces demands for an early election, and Belgium's Prime Minister resigned after his party's extremely poor performance.
Who won the European elections? The results are almost all in, so let's have a look together. What we're seeing all over Europe is a breakthrough for the far right. Around a quarter of the elected MEPs belong to various European far-right parties. The far right came out on top in France, Italy, Austria, and Hungary. They also scored well in Poland, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, among others.
There's clearly a shift towards the far right in the West, right? Now, I want to make it very, in Europe, right? Why is this happening, okay, in 2024? Why are some European countries, okay, particularly some countries that we are interested as passport bros, moving towards the far right, okay? So let me bring up one point here, okay? So I think that the first point here, okay, and I think it's very clear here, is that woke culture, wokeism is getting out of control, right, in European countries, in America and Europe, because we know that Europe looks up to America and takes from American culture, okay? Woke culture in the TV shows, in the music, in the education system, and people are sick and tired of it. Theo, do you agree there, Theo, or do you disagree, brother, as to that could be one reason why it's going more and towards the far right, bro?
I think that's one part of it. I mean, the far right in Europe, especially like we look at Le Pen and others, has been there since the early 90s. So it's just a question of time. Definitely people are not liking the woke culture. I know we're not liking the woke culture here in the United States. Several of us, including myself, have quite a lot to say about what we're seeing in programming, what we're seeing in Disney in particular, and other locations. We're like, we're done. This is enough. And basically we're making our voices being known by voting or by our purchases. So something has to be done about it. I mean, there's some things I don't mind, but there's a certain part in which I kind of put my hat, what can I say? I hold the line, and I say enough's enough. We've gone too far. So I'm not surprised. If you look at, again, history of politics, these kinds of things usually happen when politicians have forgotten the will of the people and they go too far in one direction over a certain length of time. Eventually people start getting, guillotines out. They start going crazy. Say it. Oh, enough's enough. We're done with it. Okay, let's just take care of this. So, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of points here to discuss about why this is actually occurring.
Awesome. Brother, great point there, Theo. You mentioned how Marine Le Pen has been there since the 90s, right? But I say, brother, in the last 20 years, right? Actually, the last 15 years, something has seriously gone wrong in Europe and in the West, where we've seen certain topics, certain ideas, particular agendas, right, go into overdrive, Theo, right? Now it's always been there, Theo, right? It's always been there. We see it here and there, right? But it wasn't to a point where it was annoying and actually bothering people and actually infiltrating every single aspect of our lives, Theo, right? The music is brainwashed with it. The education system is brainwashed with it, brother. The movies are brainwashed with it, brother. The TV shows are brainwashed with it, brother. Okay, and the majority of people aren't like that. The majority of people don't think like that, right? It's certain ideas are being pushed by the European elites that people have had enough. We've had enough, Theo. Theo, do you think that that's a reaction to, to the agenda being pushed, that people are fed up? Listen, I'm going to vote for these people. They're far right and they are against every single aspect of wokeism, Theo. Do you agree with that, Theo? Pick it up, brother.
Yeah, I do think so. I do agree with that. And I have my own issues with this personally, because I look at the various politicians and it's hard. There's some things are definitely hard, but I have plenty of conservative friends who are hardcore conservative and they don't care. They're like, we're getting rid of woke and we're doing it now and we don't care the cost. And they don't care what it means either. So yeah, there's going to be a change. Part of this going against woke culture was, Brexit. The UK leaving the European Union. I was against this because I thought, particularly like London being the financial hub of Europe, was a very advantageous to the UK. But there's a lot of people that are like, hey, look, we're sick and tired of what the EU is making us do, and we don't want that. We want to have our own culture, our own autonomy, and we want to be away from these people. So there was Brexit. So it makes sense that this is going on, and this is actually a weakness of the West at this point.
Facts, bro. Absolute facts. So the next point I want to discuss here, right, as to why Europe is going far right, is because of feminism. And I know that might sound a bit crazy here, right, but hear me out, brothers, please. So what I'm saying here, right, is that feminism, right, is not only a leftist idea. So what I'm saying here is that feminism only hasn't, taken over the leftist ideologies, right? I'm actually seeing feminism, right, amongst conservative commentators in the US and in the UK. But I'm thinking, right, I thought feminism was a leftist idea and agenda. Why am I seeing conservative women, talk about feminism, talk about being independent? And Theo, I remember you mentioned this a couple months ago, right? And I thought, Theo, are you sure about that? Are you sure that a lot of conservative chicks are feminists in America? But Theo, me doing more research, Theo, recently, and they're talking posts on Twitter, on interviews, they're quite feminist, Theo, right? So yeah, feminism, right, that has infiltrated and compromised not only the leftist movement, but also the conservative movement as well, Theo, right? And people are thinking, I don't like feminism, and which is a fair point. I don't like it too. And they're thinking the far right doesn't embrace feminism, so should I be voting for them? Look it out for us, Theo. What's your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, the conservative women, it's amazing how many conservative women, particularly church-going conservative women, are deeply feminist in nature. And they'll say one thing like that looks conservative, and then they'll say and do a very feminist action afterwards. And we're kind of looking like, that's not conservatism, that's feminism. And I mean, I have it with my church group all the time. Women saying that they're traditional and they're conservative, blah, blah, blah. And then when they start talking and start doing things, it's like, oh yeah, they're actually feminists. And I look at them, and one of the ways I can always tell if they're really feminists is I just say, I'm going to use my passport and go abroad and marry somebody else. And they're really angry about that. And they're like, why don't you marry someone inside the church? Why don't you get us? Why don't you get one of us? Right? And they're really violent against it. Whereas a conservative woman would be like, I respect what you want to do as a man. Go ahead. They don't have an issue with it. I even showed I showed white American women who married Japanese men in Japan, and I said, was this oppression? And they said, no, that's toxic. I was like, that's funny, because it's just anything they don't like, they just say it's toxic. So basically, feminism is deeply inside the church. It's why men stopped going to church. Feminism is deep legally inside the institution of marriage. It's why men stopped marrying, right? And even look at France. A father cannot have his children DNA tested. That's a part of the law, right?
Yeah, I heard about that recently.
Right.
Damn.
So he has to figure out some way to do it, to hide it. I mean, if that's not an abuse of power, I don't know what is. Like, that's some crazy crap right there. And even if he shows that the child isn't his, he's still required to pay. I mean, that's some crap. So that's why these are just examples. We're talking about the employment situation. The employment and salaries and taxes in Western Europe are all whack. And it makes an environment where innovation is pretty much squashed straight out. And you can't really, those who work can't be compensated. What happens is that you have people who work, and then their labor or the marginal product of their labor is distributed fairly among everyone, which is crazy. So the engineer who can do the job, he has to give his salary, either in taxes or other way, to everyone else who isn't even contributing. And this is some crap. So this is why Europe is such an issue, right? And there's some big problems. So you have that, and then also all the immigrants that are coming over because of the wars. So you have the Syrian issue in Syria, and then North Africa happening. Those two alone are stressing the European system, and they're allowing these people to come in, and then they're also allowing them to still practice Islam and have that recognized. And that is, for most of Europe, that's like a cultural taboo. You're going against the grain right there. And so you have people who are like, hey, look, this is my country. I want to be Christian here. I can't go to the Middle East and be Christian like I want to. This is my country. We fought for this land. We want to be Christian here. I have to go deal with this other religion, and my taxes are paying for this? What the heck? And they have a legitimate right to say that. That's legitimate frustration. And people to say like, oh, you shouldn't think that way. You're blah 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 blah. People are like, I'm going to vote against it. That's it. And so that makes sense. I mean, I get it. I understand the situation and what they're feeling. So the fact that they're going to the far right kind of makes sense.
Theo, let me push back there a bit, Theo, right? So in regards to the immigration crisis, right? Okay. So obviously a lot of Syrians coming in, a lot of Middle Easterns coming in, people from Africa coming in, but who's responsible, in your opinion, Theo, for these wars going on in the Middle East, in Africa, right? But wouldn't you say that how Europe does things, how America does things on a geopolitical scales, their foreign policy, right, has in some cases, right, kind of pushing out locals from their country because of the wars into Europe, Theo. So can you blame them? That's what liberal would say to you, Theo, right? And how would you respond to that?
Well, we've had this. I mean, Putin not being involved is a joke. Of course, Putin is also involved in this, and of course, Russia isn't accepting any refugees. Instead, they're making refugees in Ukraine. So I understand what the liberals are saying about this. I get it. But the far right doesn't care. If they don't like it, they don't like it. And they're going to vote against it. And that's something that the liberals need to really understand. these people on the far right do not care anymore. They're fed up with the situation. So I'll give you an example with Trump in the United States. I mean, Trump right now is a convicted felon. He cannot vote for himself in the election. He can't vote. He's a felon. All right, but he might get elected. There's a great likelihood he's going to get elected. Now, the right has said for so long, you wouldn't vote for anyone who's a felon, of someone who has this or that, blah blah blah. With Trump, they don't care anymore because they will do anything to counterbalance the liberals and the left at this point. And I don't, at this point, I kind of don't blame them. I see why they're thinking this way, and they're like, we're done. We're not having this anymore. This is over. And then they can go into the institutions and change things.